So a lot of the studies that Jason Risa Giorgiani is doing, from my perspective, it is a mind altering experience to listen to him actually because I have been studying this though on the fringe, and not nearly as specifically as he has from an academic standpoint, but searching for the truth and beginning to do this with the internet before they started to erase and vet out, so to speak, a lot of information that you would see about certain religions, things that were posted up on the dark web, stuff like this, where you could really amalgamate and put things together for good or ill. Um, but you got to realize you're always involved in the situation, right? So, having had the experiences, my form of study, the depth of the study that I could handle in certain areas, I would always take those postulations into physical form. Whereas somebody like him would chase the next degree or write the next book and think, okay, I'm going to come out with this, establish this from an academic standpoint, make this almost like a peer reviewed supplication to the academic hierarchy, right? Which Jason changed, his personality changed quite a bit when he was ultimately rejected from that for from what he would say speaking the truth, going too deep in, too far in, right? Not rubbing the elbows with politicized agents, right? And that's really who's in all these areas all the time. Like they live on at these gates, right? But when Jason starts to look back, and that's what he's doing throughout all his work, and I've watched several of his interviews, and I look forward to watching several more. But I don't have the money to get my hands on any of his publications or his books, you know. So I really try to take into deep consideration everything that he's coming up with, positing, and understanding the esoteric side of what he's saying. Particularly, I became very interested about a decade ago in Zoroastrianism, and hearing him talk about it in such a way, and then hearing him reference that as a movement, of something to be aware of and to watch, because as you see, you know, Friedrich Nietzsche is being talked about in areas that you would never expect anyone to, you know, enter into. Like, in the past, he was heavily associated with people like Pierre Proudhon, you know, mutualism, and then he was branded with anarchy, and then anarchy was turned into a very negative thing. And Nietzsche was looked at like he was the commander for the SS and was the entire reason why Hitler did the things he did, even though Madison Grant and the Passing of the Great Race was debatably much more up there in the profile of the things that he read, and you know, a lot of the things that he alludes to, I'm sure, in Mein Kampf, you know, My War, right? And that's something that Jason Giorgiani says in this interview with Aeon Bytes and Gnostic Radio, where he talks about there being a super war, an Uber Kampf, right? Where you have this this age old concept of this religion that goes far back, you know, probably prior to the Ophites, but that he doesn't specifically talk about this because he's not going off on this sort of biblical trail. He's really looking at historically, um, and he does do this, and he does diligence at this as he goes. He works on the. I'm not going to say the outer parameters of the Bible, but if you're viewing it from a Christian perspective, that's probably how you'd see it, a westernized perspective more so, right? But he was raised in New York, and you know he has his heritage in the Middle East, but he's looking specifically at Zoroastrianism, and then obviously he's looking at modern day Iran, Iraq, Babylon, ancient Babylon, and beginning to see, Mithraism and um, Medea, and mainly how he follows it up is into this Prometheism, and he's looking for where, the trail to these very dark and ancient black magic cults, which was like for thousands upon thousands of years was this mystical element that tied directly into witchcraft, and like people don't realize how far back sorcery really goes. So much so that there's been a lot of campaigns throughout the years that have been set up to make it appear like Mindcraft or spiritual warfare isn't really a thing, right? We're taking our energy, and many people think through capitalistic means always from the time they're born through their family lineage to think that if I put out any energy out into this world, I need to yield at least equal or more back. And most people think I need to equal more back. Others are searching for the truth, and there's a requirement to garner the truth, and at whatever cost. And so we're looking at for this trail back to this very archaic, arcane, ancient, mystical religion, um, and that because it's the same elements that exist now existed then, and you could even say even more so because there's more. Um, what was it, H. Holmes, right? The one who was supposedly at the world's. He had murdered this woman, taken her house, then forged the deed and signed the house over to him, and then he went down and took over her. She had a supermarket that she was running um, nearby the building that she owned, and he went over and took that property over as well, or at least the business, and then with all these people that he was killing, taking them into this gas chamber, right? These families would come in, he'd have them wait in the lobby, greet him, have them wait in the lobby, and then he had the room hooked up with gas, and then he'd kill them. And I don't know what he would do. It's pretty disgusting to think about, right? But he would have this whole family, and he would sell the bones to different colleges around the country. And I remember one program years ago was talking about whether or not they could really go back and find out which colleges um, um, had procured those and purchased those skeletal remains, right? And whether or not that's something where these people should be and could be laid to rest, right? And obviously, there are thousands of people that were missing for this years long World's Fair. But curiously, it leads back to what a lot of people have alluded to, a cover up with Tartaria, right? With respect to Tartaria, where there was many, seemingly overnight, right? Within like a year's time, there was these, and sometimes just months, there were these like ancient colosseums, Greco-Roman type colosseums that were erected, um, that a lot of people think that the destruction of those upon the World Fair closing, at that particular juncture, was a way to do this mad cover up with pre-existing architecture that 100% proved, through the procession of time, and they would become like, basically harbingers to a past civilization, and more so would be looked at with ever more scrutiny. So there's a whole bunch of people that are looking into Chicago, right, Tartaria, and starting to see that there still are these artifacts, these structures, this architecture that still hails to and seems to exist as a representation of a past civilization where giants indeed exist, and there's no other reason for these massive, 18-foot high doorways or these huge windows, right? That these buildings were built to adequately supply an alternate method for these massive people to come in and do business or banking or whatever it was, right? And then there's this conjecture of there being 1,000 years missing, that have sort of been erased between, say, the time of, well, AD, right, the time of Jesus, and leading up to about third to sixth century, right? That there seems, I think it's more or less alluding toward like the eighth or ninth century, right? And up to 1,000 years after that, right? So that, or around 1,000 years after that, where you see the strange disappearance of a lot of these buildings. And there are supposedly maps, too many maps, too numerous to just discount and to say that these ancient maps were just incorrect, or they thought that there was a landmass, or that things were called, they had different names at this time, or they were referred to through certain gypsy mapping systems, arcane knowledge that was passed on, whatnot, right? So when you get into this huge cover up, you then have to look at the big spectacle that's put out today, which is ufology and ETVs, and the like, that directly have caused people to start to look at Antarctica as the main contender for Atlantis. That if you just moved it over just a little bit, not all the way up to where all the current continents are, but you showed that there is a sort of electromagnetic pole position drift that does occur, right? And that it was possibly maybe even manufactured or engineered to a certain extent, and that even through the Younger Dryas and these other massive cold spells, like these more minor versions of an ice age, right, that seem to come in cycles as well, that you sort of see this migration occur, right, and this covering up of this huge continent that was once Atlantis, right, and that there is indeed an opening, a doorway into the inner Earth, and that is where many of the people that are in the UAP field believe that there are housed within the Earth right now those who could be referred to as Sumerians, or even Nephilim, or Elohim, or angels, or possibly our progenitors, right? So this theme is really becoming a point of contention between different systems of belief. I mean, specifically religions, and then further places a lot of stress in scientific circles, because you have a lot of people who have been following these cults and these practices for a very long time. Everything from Rosicrucianism to certain Ophaic, like Cain worship, on into Dionysian sex magic, and things that Aleister Crowley talked about as far as Horus, and things that allude back to ancient Egypt and a connection with things that might be seen as those that stemmed from Atlantis, the sort of technomancy, or a magic, right, that occurs from this lineage, or this belief system, that one has been bestowed with certain what would be referred to as inspiration from certain muses, as to be downloaded information, and that there is a secret or private conjecture between, particularly with women. When you look at, if you ever watched Nosferatu from last year, that is a chilling, Bill Skarsgård, why he does all these creepy, I mean, that's something in itself, right? But when you look at Nosferatu and you're thinking about the direct communication, invasion, and this sort of supreme force that can't just be killed away, that he was able to create a method in order to re-energize, to take in stem cells, to take in a sort of spiritual bloodletting, if you will, from other people, and to feed off the plasma or the energy of certain peoples, and that he could feel a purity or a kinship or a connection of some sort in some very dark sort of way with certain peoples, right? And that is, again, alludes back to this sort of Elohim or hierarchy, a lineage of supremacy where it becomes undeniable, because you look at it in Scientology, you see it definitely in Christianity, whatever sect or predictive element that exists in that certain type of Christianity, right? Because there are many. It's along with Zoroastrianism, there's a very pure state, along with Hinduism. You have to see in the Bali Islands, they, you know, you see that they have a completely different outlook with the totems and things that became totem worship that hailed back to animism that reached the Hawaiian Islands, the Tongan Peninsula, many different places, right? But you see how eugenics has been at play for the long, and that it really is, when you look into the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the papal supremacy and the ties into Rome, and the possibility that this does tie directly into Ophite worship, Cain worship, back into much darker regions, darker religions that knew how to use entropy, and hailing back to some sort of arcane, archaic form of technology that is alluded to in the Vedas, and ancient Sanskrit, right? That you've got this undeniable idea of this presence that now, when you fast forward that into a lot of Jason Reza Giorgiani as well as Nathaniel Gillis's work, it paints a very chilling picture that people could be controlled almost like a remote control, i.e., Nosferatu, that people could be entered into, but there's a certain lineage or bloodline that makes people more susceptible, like the study of blue-eyed people and the susceptibility to be brainwashed that was really opens up some groundbreaking research, right? Whether that's something that's being worked on to late or not. That you're talking about telomere length. You're talking about certain physiological traits that people display that display a deeper root to their genetic or their genome ties, and the propensity to not only believe something, but to be neurolinguistically controlled, and then outright what's happening now with this psionics thing. And if you know about, or you've gotten into Jake Barber, or Lou Elizondo, or any of these other people, David Grush, you're really looking at the fact that these psionics are 100% validated, even in a laboratory setting. So now you have these telepathy tapes, right? And you have telepathic abilities done by way of, say, like parents to these highly autistic children. A lot of times they don't speak, they're non-speaking autistic type elements involved there, where it makes this direct connection, this undeniable implication back to sort of this Merkaba or matrix or cybernetic control system that may still be almost like the ley lines and the torsion field energy connection around the world, and maybe in the entire solar system. And whether or not how the Schumann resonance, the Van Allen belt, the Curie belt, how all of these electrical currents kind of tie directly into a central motif or a central theme that could be seen as archaic or arcane technology from their origins.